I heard Paul Krugman on TV last night, who would be politically and economically very different from you, I think.
Absolutely.
But Krugman speculated that this is actually a stalking horse for future nationalization of troubled banks, because this so-called stress test for the banks will show that the big banks are so troubled that drawing in private investment to buy up toxic mortgages, which is what Geithner is trying to accomplish, just won't happen or just won't be enough to save the banks. Then the Obama folks can say, well, we tried the private sector and it didn't work. How much do you agree with that analysis?
Well, I agree. I mean, I don't think there's any reason for private money to come into these banks. I mean, they're just throwing their money away. I think all the major financial institutions in this country are basically insolvent, and we ought to let them go bankrupt, and we ought to let more responsible businessmen come on and pick up the pieces.
But let me stop you on that for a second, because it's such a big statement. All the major financial institutions in this country are basically insolvent. What happens to the country? What happens on Main Street? What happens to mom and pop with savings accounts?
Well, whatever is going to happen.
If they all actually go under.
But whatever is going to happen, it's worse to prop them up. The losses are still there. And so what happens is we're just going to end up diffusing the losses among the entire population of Americans, as opposed to letting the losses fall on the people that basically took the risks and deserved to lose the money. Instead of, why are we socializing all the losses? And we're creating additional moral hazards for the future. I mean, people assume that just because there's a problem, that there's a government solution. There isn't. All they're going to do is make the problem worse. Sometimes, as I said, we've got to face up to the problems and deal with them, not try to paper them over with government programs.
In your view, in your way of doing things, would all the FDIC insured accounts be protected?
Well, look, I don't think we should have had an FDIC to begin with. I think, again, there was a moral hazard there. I think most Americans, do more research on buying a plasma TV than on opening up a bank account. Nobody cares what kind of risks banks take. That's one of the reasons that they're all insolvent, because no one cared what they did with their money because the government guaranteed it. So in a perfect world, there would be no FDIC whatsoever.
So now I know you can't actually be running for Senate from Connecticut, because nobody could get elected saying there shouldn't be an FDIC.
Well, there's a lot of things that I would be saying were I to run, and I'm obviously not really a candidate, but if I were to run, I would say a lot of things that nobody has said before. And, look, Reagan got elected president saying a lot of things that presidents hadn't said in the past. Unfortunately, what happened with Reagan is he didn't implement a lot of the things that he campaigned on.
I read somewhere that you're in some way aligned with Ron Paul, and he, when he was running for president, he said there shouldn't even be a Federal Reserve setting interest rates.
Well,
are you
sure,
a Ron Paulista?
I don't think there should be a Fed, but I don't think that the government should take over the Fed's functions directly. That would be even worse. The Fed, to the extent that we have one, it should be totally independent, and it should not be a tool of politicians. It should not be empowered to try to artificially goose the economy or stimulate the economy. That's not why it was created, and that's not why it should function. But, I was certainly a small part of his campaign. I was an economic advisor to Ron Paul's campaign. Not that he needed any economic advice. I mean, Ron Paul should be advising the other politicians. In fact, he should be advising all the other economists. And, in fact, the government should fire every economist with the word economist in their title. All these new groups that the president is coming up with, all these people, it's all a waste of taxpayer money. They ought to fire them all and just ask Ron Paul what to do.
Franken Mamaroneck, and that was unambiguous. Franken Mamaroneck, you're on WNYC with investor Peter Schiff. Hello.
Hi. Why hasn't Geithner told us which banks have the worst problems? And will his proposed stress test reveal which banks have the worst problems? And then can they consolidate? And why does it take so long to find out this basic information?
Well, I don't know if Geithner even knows which banks are in the worst trouble, and if he did, he probably wouldn't say anything about it.
That's the point, in theory, of the stress test, right, is to flesh out which of the banks really are in so much trouble that they can't stand.
Well, I mean,
is that accurate?
Well,
at least in
I don't
theory?
think any of them could be standing without government money and without what the government is already doing behind the scenes. If the Federal Reserve hadn't blown out its balance sheet and spent trillions of dollars creating a market for these assets, they'd already be bankrupted.
Albert in Manhattan. You're on WNYC with Peter Schiff. Hi, Albert.
Hello, Peter. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a private investor for 45 years. I live in Paris half the year. Two questions. What is America going to produce that the rest of the world is going to buy from us that can't be produced better and cheaper in countries around the world? And secondly, with these trillions of dollars in paper coming out as we speak right now, when do you expect inflation to kick in? Because for sure it's coming, and I know it.
That's part of your basic prediction, right? The dollar's going to tank and inflation's going to take off.
Right. Well, inflation is already taking off. It's the act of expanding the money supply. That is inflation. All this quantitative easing, this is just another, it's a euphemism for inflation.
But wait, everybody else is talking about deflation.
Because they're concentrating on the effects of inflation, which is prices. Prices are falling right now, despite the fact that the government is creating a lot of inflation. But you have to understand that those factors that are pushing prices down are temporary, and they're going to go away soon. And all you're going to have is the inflationary forces pushing prices up, and prices are going to go through the roof. And the gentleman is correct to point out we need to make things in this country, and we need to make them competitively. And the government is interfering with that process. We need the private sector to be reinvigorated. We need capital going to manufacturers. We need less government. We need less regulation so we can start making things competitively again, so we can start exporting, so we can dig our way out of this gigantic hole.